My ex tried to take my children from me in court. Then my son handed over the letter that changed everything. I was there in court, trying not to cry, while my ex-husband's lawyer tore me apart in front of the judge. She's broke. She can't even afford a home or decent food and clothes for the kids, she said with a mocking smile. Why should she keep them? I clenched my jaw and stayed silent. I could feel my hands shaking. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. The judge nodded slowly, as if he agreed. That moment felt like the air was sucked from my chest. All I could think about were my children, Luca and Arya. What would happen if they took them away from me and handed them to a man who only cared about control and appearances? I couldn't afford a lawyer like his. I couldn't really afford anything. I was barely staying afloat. But I was here. I showed up. And I was doing everything I could for my children. Then, just as I felt myself slipping into that silent panic where your body stays still but your thoughts scream, my 7-year-old son stood up. Mom. Derek, he said loud enough for the courtroom to hear. Can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe? The room froze. Everyone turned. Derek stiffened. His lawyer blinked like she'd just been slapped. Even the judge stopped mid-sentence. I had no idea what letter Luca was talking about. My heart pounded. He had never said anything about a letter. But I nodded, and as he walked to the stand with that folded paper in his small hand, everything changed. I wasn't always the kind of woman who sat in court afraid to speak. I used to be confident. I had a job. I had friends. I laughed with dreams that felt real. But when I married Derek, things changed slowly, then suddenly. He wasn't always cruel. At first, he was charming, generous, persuasive. He told me I didn't need to work. He said I should stay home, raise the kids, and let him handle the money. You've done enough, he said once. You deserve to rest. I didn't realize what I was giving up when I agreed, my independence, my voice, my safety net. I became invisible in my own life. After our daughter Arya was born, Derek started changing. He was always tired, always critical. Every dollar I spent was questioned. If I bought diapers without checking the sale price first, he would go silent for hours. If I mentioned going back to work part-time, he reminded me I had no recent resume, or he'd say, "We don't need your help. We need you to be a good mother." By the time he left, I had nothing. No savings, no lawyer, no one on my side but my kids. He closed the joint account and moved in with someone new. He hired a lawyer right away. I couldn't even afford one. I went to the free legal clinic at the county courthouse and waited in line for 2 hours holding a folder full of receipts and pictures of my kids eating boxed macaroni on paper towels because we had no clean dishes. Our apartment was small. I worked 2 off-the-books cleaning jobs just to keep up with rent. We had no cable, no internet. I used a prepaid phone and hoped it didn't run out of minutes if the school needed to call me. I washed my kids' clothes by hand in the bathtub. Sometimes the water heater barely worked, so I boiled water on the stove and mixed it in buckets. Luca never complained. Arya hummed little songs while I scrubbed her socks. I didn't tell anyone how bad it got, not even my mother. I was too ashamed. She had warned me about Derek years ago. She said he looked at people like they were transactions. But I was too in love back then to listen. When the court date came, I was terrified. Derek had filed for full custody, claiming I was unfit. He said I was unstable, poor, incapable of providing a good life. His lawyer was brutal. They brought spreadsheets and photos of his beautiful house. They wore expensive suits and smiled like it was already decided. I walked into that courtroom in a borrowed dress, a second-hand jacket, and a plastic folder with school records, attendance sheets, and a letter from our landlord confirming I had never missed a payment. I knew it wasn't enough. But I had to try, for Luca, for Arya. That morning, Luca held my hand as we walked up the courthouse steps. "Is it going to be okay?" he asked. I smiled, but it felt fragile. "Yes, honey. It's going to be okay." But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything. All I knew was that I loved my children. I knew what it was like to go without and still put them first. I knew what it felt like to cry silently in the bathroom after bedtime so they wouldn't see me. I knew how hard I worked to make their little world feel safe when everything around us was shaking. Inside the courtroom, I sat up straight and still. I watched Derek avoid eye contact. I listened as his lawyer listed everything I didn't have. Money. Stable housing. Reliable transportation, she said. Her son wears second-hand shoes with holes. His teacher says he sometimes skips breakfast. This is not neglect. This is poverty. And poverty is not a crime. But it is a risk. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask, where were you when I skipped dinner to make sure there was enough cereal left? Where were you when I sold my wedding ring to buy winter coats? But I stayed silent. I had learned that in court, anger doesn't look like strength, it looks like instability. The judge nodded slowly, as if every accusation made perfect sense. My heart sank. And just when I felt like I might not survive the rest of the hearing, I felt that small tug on my sleeve. Luca, my sweet and brave boy, looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Mom, can I tell the judge something?" The courtroom felt colder the second Derek's lawyer started to speak again. Carla Din walked with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times and expected to win again. She stood tall, her voice sharp and strong, as she presented her version of my life, a version stripped of truth, designed to humiliate. She doesn't have stable employment. She receives inconsistent financial aid. Her apartment is temporary housing. These children deserve better than a mother who can barely feed them. No. I didn't look at Derek. I didn't need to. I could already picture his blank, relaxed face, watching it all unfold as if he had nothing to do with it. As if my financial ruin hadn't been carefully orchestrated by him. He was the one who emptied our joint account days before leaving. He was the one who refused to help with bills unless it made him look good in front of his parents. But none of that mattered in that room. The only thing the judge had in front of him were spreadsheets and photos from Derek's side, images of his immaculate house, the fully stocked fridge, brochures from private schools. Carla flipped through her documents at a calm pace, pulling out my bank statements. She held them as if they were dirty laundry. Your Honor, as you can see, my client provides a safe and consistent environment. The children have their own rooms, regular meals, a nanny. Meanwhile, Ms. Morrow has no documented income, no verified employer, is behind on utilities, and received a late rent notice in February. This is not a safe or stable situation for two young children. I felt my face flush. She didn't mention the fact that I had taken every job I could, often cleaning houses for cash because formal employment wasn't an option with 2 kids and no childcare. She didn't mention that the rent notice had been resolved within days, or that I had sold everything of value I owned to keep food in the fridge. The judge didn't speak right away. He leaned back, looking at the papers as if they confirmed what he already believed, that I was trying, but trying wasn't enough. I wanted to defend myself, explain everything. But I also knew how that would look. I had been warned not to interrupt, not to sound defensive, not to cry too much or seem too cold. So I sat there in silence, ashamed, burning with shame and frustration. My fingers dug into the edge of my seat. I kept my eyes on the children sitting quietly beside me. Aria was drawing on a scrap of paper with a broken crayon. Luca was staring at Derek with narrowed eyes. Then Carla said the sentence that cut deeper than any insult she had delivered so far. Why should she keep the children if she can't even afford to care for them? It echoed in my mind. Why should I keep them? I held back the tears pressing behind my eyes. I knew my reality didn't look impressive on paper. I didn't have new clothes for them. I couldn't afford fancy lunches or ballet classes. But I was there every night. I was the one brushing their hair, checking for monsters under their beds, staying up late sewing patches by hand onto their jackets because I couldn't afford new ones. None of that mattered to the court. Only the numbers mattered. Numbers I didn't have. The judge looked at me, his eyes heavy with doubt. He opened his mouth as if he were about to speak when I felt it, that small tug on my arm again. Luca. He whispered, Mom, can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe? At first, I didn't understand what letter he meant. I looked at him confused until he pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and held it up. My stomach twisted. I didn't know what it was, but something in Derek's posture changed. He sat up straighter. Carla's eyes locked on the paper. "Luca, what is that?" I asked softly. He didn't answer me. He looked at the judge. "Can I give it to him?" he asked. The judge looked surprised but nodded. "Bring it here." Luca stepped forward, small but steady, walked past the row of polished suits and wide eyes, and handed the letter to the judge with both hands. The room fell into a strange, heavy silence. I could see Derek beginning to sweat. "Yes," Carla turned toward him, whispering something quickly, her confidence shaking for the first time. The judge unfolded the paper. I watched his eyes move across the words. His expression changed slowly, confusion, then understanding, then something sharper. He looked directly at Derek. "Mr. Morrow," he said, "would you like to explain this?" The moment the judge said those words, the temperature in the courtroom seemed to shift. Derek's eyes widened. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Carla leaned toward him again, whispering, but this time her voice had a thread of urgency. Whatever was written on that piece of paper had loosened something. I leaned forward, my heart pounding, trying to read the judge's face. He held the letter in both hands and looked at it again. His brow furrowed. Then he read aloud, to Derek Morrow, from L. Becker, CPA. Subject, Strategic Financial Protection, Divorce Preparation. Then he paused, looking around the courtroom, then back to Derek. "This is a financial strategy letter dated 3 months before your divorce was filed. It details instructions for opening offshore accounts, transferring assets to shell LLCs, and minimizing reported income in order to influence custody and support proceedings. It includes the line, maintain primary custody if possible, but at minimum, ensure she has little ground for legal appeal by appearing financially stable and morally sound." He stopped reading. The silence in the courtroom wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. All eyes were now on Derek. Even Carla looked stunned. She turned her head slowly toward him, whispering something that sounded like, "Is this real?" I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen between disbelief and a kind of silent rage that had no release. I had suspected things. I knew Derek was strategic, cold when it came to money, and ruthless when it came to getting what he wanted. But to see it written, to hear a judge read it aloud in front of my children, was something I never imagined. The judge lowered the letter and placed it neatly on the bench in front of him. Then he looked back at Derek and said, "You were intentionally misleading this court. You attempted to manipulate the outcome of these proceedings through financial deception. This letter is a direct attempt to use wealth and calculated dishonesty to deny your children access to their mother." Derek stood up abruptly. "That letter is old. It wasn't used." "I didn't even." "Sit down, Mr. Morrow," the judge snapped. The authority in his voice startled everyone. Aria looked up from her drawing and reached for my hand. I wrapped my arm around her without taking my eyes off the judge. He turned his attention to me. "Ms. Morrow, were you aware of this letter before today?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "This is the first time I've seen or heard of it." "And your son found it?" I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yes. He never mentioned it until now." Luca looked at me, then said, "I thought it might help. I found it when I was looking for my tablet at Dad's house. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble, but I didn't want us to lose." The judge looked at him for a long moment. Then something softened in his expression. "You did the right thing, young man," he said. He turned to Carla Din. "I will review this document in full and pause this hearing for a formal investigation into Mr. Morrow's financial conduct. In the meantime, primary custody will remain with Ms. Morrow, with a temporary suspension of the respondent's parenting time until this matter is resolved." The words sank in slowly. I heard them, but my body didn't react. At first, it was as if my brain needed a moment to make sure I hadn't imagined the words. When they finally registered, I felt my knees tremble. I sat down hard, pulling both of my children into my arms. Carla Din remained silent, her lips tight, arms firmly crossed. She didn't argue. She couldn't. The damage was done. Derek didn't say another word. After the judge left the bench, the bailiff dismissed the court. I stayed seated, arms wrapped around my kids as if they were the only things anchoring me to the ground. Luca leaned toward me and whispered, "I ruined it." "No, sweetheart," I said. "You saved us." He nodded once and said nothing more. He didn't need to. I finally understood the kind of strength it takes for a child to carry something like that. And I realized something else. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like the truth had a real chance. I walked out of that courtroom that day holding my children's hands, barely feeling the ground beneath my feet. My legs moved, but my mind was somewhere else, replaying the judge's words in my head, trying to believe them. He had stopped the hearing. He had suspended Derek's parenting time. He had believed me, or at least, finally seen the truth for himself. Outside, the air was cold. Luca let go of my hand to zip up Aria's coat. I watched him, feeling a wave of gratitude I still didn't have words for. How do you thank a child for something like that, for standing up and doing what no adult in that courtroom had the courage to do? A few days later, the court ordered a formal investigation into Derek's financial activity. I met with a court-appointed investigator, a woman named Ms. Eltrand, who listened carefully, took notes, and not once looked at me like I was less. She reviewed the letter, asked questions about our finances during the marriage, and requested permission to pull all relevant tax records and asset disclosures from both parties. I agreed without hesitation. I had nothing to hide. Derek, on the other hand, did. Within a week, his house of cards began to fall. The investigator uncovered multiple accounts registered to shell companies in Nevada and Delaware, bank transfers to foreign banks, cash transactions that were never disclosed, and tax inconsistencies that made it clear he had been hiding income for years. Every time I got an update, I felt something slowly rebuilding inside me, confidence in my own memory, trust in my instincts, and a belief that maybe, just maybe, justice could exist. For so long, I had been made to feel like I was imagining things. Derek had convinced everyone, including parts of me, that I was weak, paranoid, and incapable. But now the facts were proving the opposite. The final hearing came faster than I expected. When I entered the courtroom again, this time with legal representation provided by a domestic support advocacy group, I stood a little taller. I wasn't wearing borrowed clothes. I had found part-time work cleaning offices and had saved enough for a modest black dress and sturdy heels. Small things, but they felt like armor. Derek looked different too. The confidence was gone. His new lawyer spoke in short, tense phrases. There were no smug looks or fake smiles. The courtroom had changed. The judge entered and began the session with a statement. This court has reviewed the financial investigation of Mr. Morrow and finds substantial evidence of willful non-disclosure, asset concealment, and income manipulation intended to gain advantage in these proceedings. This behavior directly contradicts the best interests of the children involved. He paused and looked at me. Ms. Morrow, in light of these findings and your demonstrated commitment to your children's well-being under difficult circumstances, this court awards you full physical and legal custody of Luca and Aria. Mr. Morrow is ordered to pay retroactive child support and will be subject to monitored visitation pending further review. I didn't cry immediately. I think a part of me was still bracing for the moment to be taken away, for someone to say there had been a mistake or a change. But no one spoke. The judge signed the order. The gavel fell. It was real. Aria squealed quietly and hugged my waist. Luca squeezed my hand. He didn't smile, but his eyes shone, steady and sure. That night we had pancakes for dinner and danced to music on the radio. Nothing fancy. Just us, in our little kitchen, laughing until the sound filled every corner of the apartment. I sat on the floor afterward, holding them both in my lap. Aria was singing. Luca was drawing something on a notepad. When I looked down, I saw what he had written. A drawing of a house with 3 stick figures. Above it, he had written, "Home is where Mom is." That letter he found was more than just evidence. It was a lifeline. A doorway out of fear and into something that finally felt like peace. He could have hidden it, thrown it away, ignored it, But he didn't. Because even at 7 years old, my son knew the difference between right and wrong. And in a room full of adults, he was the only one brave enough to speak the truth. It's been 6 months since that day in court, but I still think about it often. Not just the moment the judge ruled in my favor, or the expression on Derek's face, but the quiet strength it took to get there, the kind of strength that doesn't come from power or money, but from love. The kind that keeps going when everything else is gone. After the ruling, life didn't become perfect. I still worked long hours. I still budgeted every shopping trip down to the last dollar. I still picked up secondhand clothes and clipped coupons and said no to things other families might take for granted. But the fear was gone. The constant pressure, the feeling that someone was waiting to take everything away, that was over. Derek made a few attempts to regain control. He filed a motion to reduce his child support payments, then tried to challenge the monitored visitation requirements. But the evidence was strong, and the court held firm. He showed up to his scheduled visits 3 times, then stopped trying. I didn't explain it to the kids in too much detail. I just told them what they needed to know. Their father wasn't ready to be consistent, and they deserved people who showed up and stayed. They stopped asking after a while. Luca still talks about the letter sometimes. One night we were sitting on the couch, and he asked, "Was I in trouble for taking it?" I shook my head and looked him in the eyes. "No, sweetheart. You were brave. You told the truth when it mattered most." He nodded like he understood and rested his head on my shoulder. That moment reminded me how easily children carry burdens we don't even see. He had carried that paper for weeks. He had waited for the right moment to speak. He had chosen justice when no one asked him to. I started going to therapy. At first, it felt strange to talk about everything out loud, to hear myself admit how bad it had been. But healing needs air. The more I talked, the more I realized how much I had internalized the shame, the guilt, the lie that being poor meant I was failing my children, that I had to prove my worth by pretending to be okay instead of just being honest about how hard it really was. My therapist helped me see something I hadn't seen before. I wasn't weak for struggling. I was strong for surviving, strong for keeping a roof over our heads, for showing up in court without a lawyer, for putting my children first every single day. One weekend, I found a part-time office job that offered benefits. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I took it. I bought a laptop so I could take night classes online and work toward a certification in accounting. It was something I had always been good at, but never believed I could turn into a real career. The kids started getting better too. Aria made a new best friend in her preschool, and her teacher said she had become more talkative and confident. Luca joined the school art club, and one of his drawings was placed in the hallway. He chose a drawing of a tree with thick, deep roots underneath. He wrote, "One growing." That's what we're doing now, growing. It doesn't always feel fast or easy, but it's steady. Every week, we move a little further away from fear and a little closer to peace. Sometimes people ask me how I stayed so calm in court, how I didn't fall apart. The truth is, I almost did. But when you're a mother and your babies are on the line, you find a way to keep breathing, to keep standing. Not because it's easy, but because giving up was never an option. This story began in a courtroom with accusations that I was too poor to be a good mother. It ended with the truth being spoken by the smallest voice in the room, a child who knew what love looked like and wasn't afraid to show it. We didn't win because we had power, or money, or perfect appearances. We won because we had honesty. Because we stayed kind. And because even when the odds were stacked against us, we refused to break. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that justice doesn't always come easily, but it can still come. And sometimes, when it does, it arrives in the form of a folded letter in a small child's hand, held with quiet courage, offered with love. That was the day everything changed. Not just in court. Not just legally. But in my heart. That was the day I stopped surviving and started living again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength it takes to keep going when everything is against you, take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Leave a comment, whether you're a parent, a survivor, or just someone who believes in truth and justice. Your voice matters. I read every one. And if you want more real stories about resilience, love, and what it means to fight for what matters most, subscribe to the channel. We're building a community here, one that sees people, not just their struggles. Thank you for being part of it.